Reysaş has recently reported earnings. I will take you through what has caught my attention so far and what to expect for the second half of the year. I am also going to show you how Reysaş, one of the leading logistics companies in Turkey, is growing faster than the inflation rate and delivering amazing returns to its shareholders. I am also going to reveal some hidden gems in their balance sheet that could make them even more valuable in the future. But before we start, I want to remind you that this is not financial advice and I am not a financial advisor. You should always do your own research and consult a professional before making any investment decisions. Now that we have that out of the way, let's get straight into it. Their revenues went from 782 million liras last year to 1.5 billion liras this year. That sounds like an incredible amount of growth, but when I use lira, I always remember to add inflation into the picture as well. In 2022, Turkey's inflation rate was at 72%, so some of that growth wasn't real. However, Reysaş's revenue is up more than 92%, so there is definitely a lot of real growth going on as well. Also, let me say that this video won't be as long as my other ones. I just wanted to go over their last earnings. I covered Reysaş before and recently their REIT business, Reysaş GYO. So if you haven't checked them yet, I would highly suggest watching those after this one. And I just want to add that Reysaş is not just a warehouse builder. They are a logistics firm with 4 subsidiaries. One of them is the warehouse builder REIT Reysaş GYO. There is also the business to distribute tobacco products, a car inspection business where every car in Turkey has to go through once in every 2 years, and finally a railroads business as well where they own the wagons. Now, looking at their gross profit, it went from 322 million liras to 686 million liras. EBITDA went from 314 to 653 million liras, but most importantly, their profit went from 120 million liras to 626 million liras. This obviously means that their margins have gone up a lot considering their revenue only doubled. Speaking of margins, here are the important ratios for Reysaş. Almost everything went in the right direction for the shareholders, other than they have taken on some additional debt, which I will get to in a minute. But looking at their margins, their net profit margin is now at a whopping 43.5%, which I don't think is sustainable, but it is always great to see such high margins. Their EBITDA margins could tell us more, which also went up. It went from 40% to 43%. Now, looking at the asset side of their balance sheet, their current assets went from 682 million to 1.25 billion liras. However, their short-term debt also went from 847 million to almost 1.6 billion liras, so their current ratio is under 1 currently. One other important thing is that the equity went from 1.49 billion to 2.67 billion liras. Now, speaking of their debt and the fact that it went up, I wanted to dig a little bit deeper. These are from their first quarter reports, by the way. They don't have any debt in dollars. They have the debt in Turkish lira, which is pretty good because the inflation is eating away the debt, and also in euros. For the short term, they have 584 million in Turkish lira debt and 129 million of debt that is in euros. However, the amount of that debt is not 129 million euros, which would be almost close to 4 billion liras, which is bigger than their total debt. So I assumed it was the equivalent of 129 million liras in euro debt. The same goes for long-term debts as well. Most of it is in Turkish liras. And again, this is from the first quarter of 2023. But their net financial debt over equity is now under 1, which is always good to see. And finally, let's look at the maturity of those debts. As you can see, over 70% of it is due in 1 to 5 years. So most of it is in long-term debt. One final note about debt in general is something that I think most investors overlook, which is the fact that if your return on capital is greater than the cost of that capital, taking on debt is an incredibly smart thing to do. I would even go ahead and say that it is kind of a free money. Now, one final thing about the first half before we go on to what to expect for the second half is Reysaş has decided to establish a company called Reysaş Logistics Italia to do basically the same logistics business in Italy. It will be interesting to see how that works out. Also, they have signed a huge deal with Petkim, which is a company with a market cap around $2 billion for their logistic needs. Now, this is from the Excel file where I track Reysaş's earnings in liras and then I convert them to United States dollars because that is the money I want the growth to be happening in. And for better measurement, I use the exchange rates at the end of the period. So if I'm looking at the second quarter's earnings, I will probably use the last day of June's exchange rates to convert the profit in liras to dollars. This is only going back to the beginning of 2022, because before that, Reysaş was still in the heavy investment phase and they weren't reporting positive earnings. Actually, I heard that the CEO, Durmuş Döven, went on Turkish Bloomberg and said that their investments are still going on, but this year will be when they are collecting the fruits of their previous investments. And his son and board member Egemen Döven has been buying the stock almost at any price throughout the year as well. So looking at that, we can see enormous growth in dollar basis. You may have seen how much Reysaş is up this year, but look at that earnings growth with it too. As Peter Lynch would say, stock prices follow earnings. I mean, this kind of growth is incredible. They went from making almost $20 million last year to making $17.5 million in just one quarter this year. And compared to the same quarters last year, in the first quarter, they grew 529%, and in the second quarter, they grew 195% year over year. Now, with this kind of growth, I don't know how they would be valued if they were trading in Nasdaq. But I did some math to figure out what they will be making for the full year 2023 and compared it to their current market cap. So in the first half of 2022, they made 119 million liras, and for the same period this year, they made 626 million liras. So they made 5.2 times more in the first half year over year. Assuming it will be the same for the second half of the year as well, their total 2023 earnings would be 1.8 billion liras and their current market cap is 19.8 billion liras. So their PE, using the earnings I calculated, would be just over 10, barely double digits. And using the trailing 12 months earnings, their PE would be 23. And one final thing I want to point out is Reysaş GYO is a REIT company, and every year they have their real estate portfolio revalued by another inspector firm. While this is nothing unusual, Turkey has high inflation. In fact, it is very high. So here we have a company called USD GYO, which is another REIT company in Turkey, and they have their real estate portfolio valued 2 times a year because inflation for the first 6 months of the year is already over 30%. I actually have an example here. And this example in USD GYO's portfolio was revalued on June 27th, and it was valued 35% higher than what it was at the end of last year. So I believe by the end of the year we can expect at least an 80% premium to Reysaş GYO's real estate portfolio on paper. By the way, in reality, I believe they are worth much more than that, and in my video about Reysaş's REIT, I explained the reasons why. I highly suggest checking that out. So Reysaş GYO's current portfolio value is 13.4 billion liras. With an 80% premium, it would be 24.12 billion liras, and that is without new additions to that portfolio. But I expect, especially this year, to be major additions in the portfolio. So at the end of the year, we might see another run-up in Reysaş GYO's site that might affect Reysaş Logistics as well. So that was it for today. I hope you liked it. My channel is yet to be monetized, so please help me by liking the video, sharing, commenting and so forth. And I will probably cover those earnings as well, so stay tuned for that and take care. Bye.